So 2 weeks ago, when we last had service, the message was called How to Annoy God. And for this week, it's How to Annoy Luke. Apparently, I have a lot of things that annoy me. And so I'm a little bit afraid to even talk about them because I think if I say some of them, you will start doing them.
The number one.
Especially if you're listening right now and you are my wife.
Number one.
So
Superman sucks.
I'm going to give you a couple things though, a couple things that annoy me. One of them, we all have things that bug us, things that probably don't affect other people, that don't bug other people.
Insects. I affect everybody.
Insects, you don't like insects. Okay,
No,
they don't.
It's supposed to be.
Oh, bug. Okay, but there's certain things. I'm slow sometimes. Did I get my water yet?
No.
You know how sometimes whenever you sneeze and people say "bless you" when you sneeze. Well, sometimes when I sneeze, I usually have 3 or 4 or 5 in a row. Do you ever do that too? It's like, achoo, achoo. Yeah, it's
6 in a row.
okay. I've broken that record for sure. I've done lots of, and some people though, they don't just want to say "bless you" when you're all done. They're like, "Woo, bless you, achoo, bless you, achoo," and that just when I'm done sneezing and I can see straight, I want to knock him in the face because I hate that. I hate that. You don't even have to tell me one time. I don't care if you tell me even once, but when people want to do it every single time, that's one thing. I'll come home from work and I'm like, "How was your day?" I'll be like, "Well, so-and-so said bless you every time when I sneeze, 5 times in a row." I'll come home and tell her that. That will be one thing that will set me off for the rest of the day. Here's another thing. I get really, really squeamish when I hear a particular word, which is not a bad word. It's just a word that makes me uncomfortable.
Vomit.
Yes. I was doing a Sunday school last year, and I read the verse about how a dog returns to its... Yeah, and I couldn't even say the word. I just called the lesson the V word. But I had to because it was the next part of the Bible where I was teaching from in Sunday school, but I couldn't say that verse. So, not a bad word. I feel sick whenever I just hear it. Yeah, so I've given you all this ammo now. Here's another one that bothers me: the Papyrus font. The Papyrus font.
This is racist to me.
This is racist to you? Okay. He identifies a lot with the Papyrus font, which I still will hang out with him anyway. But the Papyrus font, does anyone in here know what I'm even talking about when I say the Papyrus font? Okay.
Yes.
And this is, since I've done some design work before, there's one particular font that gets used all the time. Yeah. Across the board, I put the thing in it today. This font gets used everywhere. And every time I see it, Emily can tell you from back whenever we were dating. And before triggered was the thing, when I'd see a Papyrus font, if we were walking down the street or something and there was a sign, there's one in Web City that says Eclipse, and whenever I see it, it's that Papyrus, I'm triggered.
Oh, I thought you
Okay?
were Comic Sans.
The Papyrus, that's another awful one. The Papyrus font is everywhere. It's in everything. It was even, did anyone ever hear this movie Avatar that came out, 10 years ago? And I like that movie, but I can't hardly look at the title. And so, yeah. So, and it makes me feel a little bit better. I'm not the only person who's bothered by the Papyrus font. Papyrus, it's everywhere. Another thing that gets on my nerves, but I want to tell you another thing here I find highly irritating.
Okay.
Something else that I find highly irritating. I hate it when people declare rights that don't exist.
It is a strong word.
That is a strong word. This is one of my things. When people declare rights that don't exist. And you hear a lot about rights whenever you're in school. Human rights, civil rights, equal rights. Rights. You hear about rights all the time. And they're a good thing. They're a real thing. But I want to tell you something about rights, and I really want you to think about this. Because it's something I really don't see a lot of people my age. They really don't get this, and I want you guys to understand this. Rights have to come from somewhere.
The right to breathe.
Rights have to come from somewhere. You have to find a reason that you have the rights that you have. In the Declaration of Independence, it says we have a few rights. Rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? If you look in the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, it says we have a right to free speech, freedom of the press. You know them all?
The rights to bear arms.
Right to bear arms. right to freedom of religion. That's an important one. Okay, and we put all those in a thing called the Bill of Rights. So rights are real. Rights are a good thing. But sometimes, this is what people will do. Sometimes people will just declare things that they want is a right. They'll just say, well, I think free health care is a right. Or I've heard even lately people say, the right to not be offended. They say, I have a right to not be offended. Some people say they have a right to a cell phone. Meaning if they can't afford to buy a cell phone, they believe the government should just give them a cell phone. These are all things that are not real rights. These are just things people want. And they just say, well, I want this to be my right. Yeah.
So like when you
That's free speech. I'm talking about when the people just make stuff up that is not a real right, and they say it's a right. This is why I'm always saying I don't like cats, because they always think they have the right.
That's why I love cats.
I have a right to steal something in black market.
I want you guys to understand something. Something is not a right just because you want it. There's no such thing as a right to health care. There's no such thing as a right not to be offended. Something's not a right just because you want it to be. Your rights have to be rooted in something else. And I want to show you what that is. Okay? What are our rights rooted in? Is it the Constitution?
No, it's the rights.
It's actually not.
Not the left.
Is it the Declaration of Independence or the Bill of Rights?
No, it's the right.
It's actually not. And I'll show you. This is what our founding fathers said. They said, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I underlined it. Where do our rights come from? We are endowed by our Creator.
Can't ride.
They're endowed by our Creator. Our rights come from God. Our rights come from God. And that is what the founding fathers believed when they gave us the rights. These things like the right to free speech, the right to religion, the right to life. That's the most important one. Well, when they gave us these rights, they weren't saying, hey, these are rights because we say so. They said our rights come from God. And if you don't believe in God, you don't really have a basis for rights. So they put them in our government documents. But the government doesn't give you your rights. The government's supposed to protect your rights. The government's supposed to say, it's supposed to keep people from taking your rights away. That's the government's job. A lot of governments will actually just do that. They'll take away people's rights. That's not what the government's supposed to do. It's supposed to protect your rights, the rights that are given to us by God. And I want to tell you something that God says about your rights tonight. And it's going to sound like it's against everything I've been saying, but it's not. You do have rights. But here's what Jesus actually calls us to do. He calls us to lay down our rights for other people. He calls us to sometimes give up our rights for other people. And I'll show you that here. In Matthew 5, 38 through 42. Jesus said, you have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you not to resist an evil person, but whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take away your tunic, let him have your cloak also. And whoever compels you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to him who asks you, and from him who wants to borrow from you, do not turn away. Jesus said, if someone slaps you, turn your other cheek to them. Let them slap your other cheek if they want to. Now, why would he say that? Well,
Does it cause you intense pain?
let me explain it here.
Do it through pain, not.
Because you're probably not going to have someone come up and slap you on the face.
I have.
I mean, it might happen, but I mean like on a regular basis. It's probably not going to be an everyday occurrence. Well, let me explain what he's saying here. So in Israel, they had a saying. They'd say an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth.
Blood for blood.
And with that, it meant blood for blood. It meant if someone knocks out your tooth, you knock out one of their teeth. If someone takes your $5, you take their $5. That's basically what it meant. If they cost you something, you cost them something. Jesus said, that's not the way to live. He said, I want my followers to live in a different way. And listen, you're not going to get slapped in the face on a regular basis. Hopefully not. I guess you might, but you might be doing something wrong if you are. But let me tell you what this means. If somebody insults you, don't insult them back. If someone's rude to you, don't be rude back. If someone's unkind to you, don't be unkind back. Don't mistreat, don't return harm for harm.
Arm for arm.
Now, let me tell you, who does this? Who follows what Jesus says here? Pretty much nobody. So Jesus is saying here, I want to tell you what he's saying. He's saying, when someone mistreats you, don't respond to it by mistreating them. If someone wants to sue you and take a piece of your clothing unfairly, Jesus says, give them another one. And you might be thinking, well, wait a second. What about my rights? Don't I have a right to defend myself? Don't I have a right to my personal property?
No.
Jesus says, give up your rights.
Okay.
He says, if you want to be a Christian, let me explain it all before you ask anything. Because I know you have questions, but let me explain it all. When you become a Christian, you're basically signing your life over to God. And you're saying, God, I'm not going to take any stance or rights over myself. It belongs to you. So let me just ask you a question here. How could this like really turn the world upside down? If you're walking down the street and someone says, can you spare $5?
Nope.
And you give them $10.
Oh,
That could blow some people's mind.
change. Please.
What if someone comes to mug you and they say, give me your wallet? And you say, okay, and do you want my jacket too? How do you think they would respond if someone did that? Yeah, they would get shocked.
They would say, put on your shirt.
I put that in as my notes, and then later I was reading some stories. I was trying to see if I could find a story to go with this, and I literally found a lady who was getting mugged. Hold on just a minute.
You get mugged.
Someone pulled a knife on her and said, give me your purse. And she said, okay, and you look cold. You want my coat too? And she literally gave the guy her coat. And he was so shocked, he put the knife away, and he's just going to walk away. And she says, hey, listen, it's going to be a long night. Instead of going around sticking your knife out at people, you're probably hungry. How about I just take you over here and I'll buy you some food? So they go to a diner, and she tells him about Jesus the whole time. He's like, why would you do all that stuff? That's crazy. Why would you offer me your coat when I'm trying to, stab you and take your purse? And she says, because I follow Jesus. This is how Jesus told us to live. So, I put that in my notes as an example, and I found a story where someone pretty much did that exact thing. And, it doesn't say what happened to the criminal after that. She didn't turn him into the cops. Hopefully he didn't do that stuff anymore. It doesn't say after that. But it would change the world if we actually did this thing. Here's something else Jesus said. He said, whoever compels you to go 1 mile, go with him too. In those days, the Romans, they had this law, because the Jewish people at that time, they didn't have rights. They didn't have a whole lot of rights. So, no, it said Jewish. The Jewish people, like who Jesus was, they didn't have rights. So the Romans would come, and this is what the Romans would say, I want you to carry my stuff for 1 mile. And the Jewish person, under the law, he had to pick up that Roman soldier's, whatever it was, and carry it for him up to 1 mile. And after 1 mile, he didn't have to do it anymore. The law just said, you have to carry it for him up to 1 mile. Not over a cliff. He just carried it to wherever it needed to go. And they would just mistreat the Jews this way. Hey, I don't want to carry my own things. You carry my stuff for me. So they had this law, and they said, you can make a Jewish person carry your stuff for up to 1 mile. And then Jesus comes along, and he says, if someone makes you go 1 mile, go 2 miles for them. Give them 2 miles.
You missed our destination.
Now, what would we say? If we were back then, we'd say, well, hey, don't I have rights? After 1 mile, I'm supposed to have rights. I'm supposed to have freedom. I don't have to carry his stuff anymore. But Jesus wants his followers to do something different. When people mistreat us, we respond with kindness to them. And whenever we do that, that's actually how we make a difference in the world. Now listen, guys, you're probably not going to have a situation where people are coming up and making you carry their stuff for 1 mile or suing you for the shirt off your back. That's probably not going to happen, but listen, if when people treat you unkindly, no, just let me finish here. If people treat you unkindly and you respond super nice to them, it's going to blow their mind. It's really what's going to change the world. Martin Luther King Jr., this is how he changed the world. Whenever people, to talk about rights, black people did not have equal rights. You guys learned about this in school. They weren't allowed to use the same facilities. They had to be all this separation and segregation, and they would march and do protests for their rights to be treated fairly. And Martin Luther King Jr. told his people, listen, when you're doing your marches and your protests, if cops show up, if people show up, and they try to fight you, or they try to beat you, or they try to hurt you, don't fight back. Don't fight back with them. He said, we're going to turn the other cheek.
Yep, and die.
Sometimes they did. But listen, because they were peaceful in their protests, they're not like how people do protests today and they set their neighborhoods on fire and gas stations and stuff like that and they call it a protest. That's not what Martin Luther King Jr. did. He had peaceful protests. They did marches. They did, they got together and assembled. But they weren't having big fights. And when the cops came, and sometimes the cops would show up, and sometimes the cops would hit them. But they didn't fight back. And what did the rest of the world see? The rest of the country looked at that and they said, okay, it's really easy to see who the good guys are here and who the bad guys are here. The police were being the bad guys sometimes. And so they changed the laws. And black people have civil rights today. It probably wouldn't have happened so fast if they were going out there and punching back at the police and all that stuff. But they showed the world, hey, we're just trying to do what's right. And the world could see what was right. And that is how you change the world. You give up your rights. And when you do, people are going to say, why'd you do that? Why'd you act like that? People don't act like that. They don't turn the other cheek. But we do it because we follow Jesus. How can I give up my rights? Because Jesus gave up his rights. Okay, Jesus, he gave up any right he had to personal property, personal happiness, even his own body. He let his body be pierced by nails. He let his body be nailed to a cross. He let his body have a crown of thorns put on it. Now, Jesus had rights. Jesus was the creator of the world.
Yep.
Jesus was God.
That's why he had the crown.
Jesus was God. He came down to the world, and he let himself become a puny little human, and he let his rights be taken away, and he let people mistreat him. But by doing that, he died for our sins. And so, listen, if we can turn the other cheek and let people be given kindness when they treat us with hate and we show them kindness, that's what's really going to change the world. Jesus did not put us here to win arguments. Jesus put us here to win hearts. And that's what our life is going to show when we turn the other cheek and when we treat people with kindness. So give up your rights and show the world a better way. Okay, we're going to jump into that food. I'm going to pray and let's go. But